Triplets Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane had everything for a happy life. But at some point, one of the girls got bored, which led to her inevitable downfall. Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane Lee were born in 1995 in Shenzhen, China. They were triplet sisters. Lucy, whose real name was Yun Lu, was the eldest because she was born 5 minutes before Caitlin and Jane. When the sisters were very young, their parents decided to emigrate to Toronto, Canada, leaving the children in China for the time being. So, in fact, close relatives took care of raising the triplets until they were 7 years old. Only when the parents had fully settled in Toronto did they bring the girls to join them. When the whole family was reunited in Canada, the triplets gained a younger brother and a younger sister. Their father ran a driving school for Chinese immigrants and was successful in his business. But the most driven and successful was Lucy's mother, Hong Wei, or Winnie, as her loved ones called her. The mother's firm thrived. Winnie ran an asset management business called Respound International, working primarily with Canadians of Chinese descent. The business involved selling life insurance policies that allowed clients to transfer money from abroad without paying taxes. Soon, Winnie became a very well-known businesswoman in Canada. She spoke at various conferences, interacting with the country's most influential people. There are even photos of Winnie with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Winnie managed to build strong connections with various members of the elite, eventually becoming a highly influential and powerful figure herself. She was not just wealthy, she was considered a multimillionaire. As for the children, they grew up gradually but rarely saw their mother because she was very busy. In the rare moments when the businesswoman carved out time for household matters in her tight schedule, she was very demanding of her daughters and son. The mother insisted on strict discipline and good grades in school. Winnie wasn't cruel, she simply wanted all her children to achieve success in the future and follow in her footsteps. She trained the girls to strive to be the best of the best. Instead of playing or hanging out with friends, they had to stay home and do all the household chores. Thus, Lucy, Caitlin, Jane, and the two younger children learned to take on significant responsibilities at a very young age. At 13, the triplets founded their own non-profit organization called the Canadian Youth Funding Association, which helped young women and children. Winnie did everything she could to push her daughters toward success in life. She took them with her to many of the business events she attended. She was preparing them to one day take her place in the company. However, not all the children felt the same way about such plans for their lives. It was very hard for Lucy to accept that her parents expected extraordinary achievements from her. She wasn't the most diligent student, which greatly disappointed Winnie. So the eldest daughter and her mother often clashed and argued over this. At school, Lucy considered herself a nerd. At the time, she wore bangs and braces and felt she could never fit in with her classmates. Even in her own family, where academic knowledge and success were valued above all, the girl felt somewhat out of place. At the age of 14, Lucy met a boy named Oliver Karafa, who was 16 at the time. He was 2 grades ahead of her. Oliver Karafa was born in Slovakia in 1993. His parents immigrated to Canada when he was 8 years old. The family first lived in Windsor and then moved to Toronto. The boy had a completely ordinary childhood. Oliver wasn't a goody two-shoes, but he wasn't considered a troublemaker either. He sometimes got into minor trouble, but that's not uncommon for most boys. In high school, Lucy and Oliver started talking, and they quickly developed a romantic relationship, which didn't last long. The boy wanted to get the girl into bed, but Lucy wasn't ready for that aspect of life yet. Oliver wasn't willing to wait for her to grow up and slept with one of her friends. Naturally, after such a turn of events, Lucy's high school romance ended abruptly. The triplets graduated from high school, and their mother insisted that all 3 daughters enroll in the business faculty at the University of Toronto. Winnie had already planned out their entire future, as it seemed she didn't really consider the girls' own wishes. It appeared that what her children wanted didn't matter to the mother. She was simply grooming her replacements. But the worst part was that the woman turned the triplets' lives into a competition among themselves. For example, she promised to buy a new car for whoever got the highest grades. Because of this, the sisters' relationships were sometimes strained. Lucy did fairly well at the university, and after finishing her studies, she began working with her mother in the life insurance business. That's when problems started resurfacing for her. Lucy tried to attract major clients, doing her best to meet her mother's expectations. But apparently, she didn't handle the task as well as Winnie had hoped. The stress of trying to do things she wasn't yet skilled at pushed the girl to her limit. Lucy decided to take a break from her career and live a little for herself. She requested a 2-year leave from work to travel the world, try something new, and figure out what she really wanted to do. The family's financial situation allowed for this, so Winnie gave in and permitted all 3 daughters to explore other areas of life. The woman promised to cover their expenses for 2 years and provided each of the triplets with a monthly allowance of several $1,000s. Although Lucy seemed to have been under intense pressure her whole life and strived to be like her mother, at the same time, she was incredibly spoiled by her parents. So, what did the Lee triplets do with their newfound free time? All 3 decided to become influencers, people who shape public opinion and influence the behavior of their target audience through social media. They created accounts on several platforms under the username Mia Triplets and began posting various content. The girls mainly positioned themselves as models. In many photos, they appeared in lingerie and swimsuits. They often posted pictures with the hashtag #SexyTriplets. This became their distinctive feature. The triplets' social media accounts grew and gained popularity. On TikTok, they had 60,000 followers, and on another social network, 40,000. They couldn't be called super popular, but they still had a sizable interested audience. A considerable number of people followed them. As the triplets gained some fame, companies started reaching out to them with collaboration offers. The sisters were sent free products with requests to promote them. They were paid between $500 and $1,000 per post. Thanks to their new lifestyle, Caitlin, one of the sisters, began participating in various beauty pageants, Miss Toronto, Miss Canada, Miss Intercontinental Canada, and others. She repeatedly won prizes and became a runner-up. Caitlin Lee became somewhat of a celebrity, which also boosted the triplets' popularity on social media. In 2019, Lucy Lee turned 24, and at the same time, something significant happened in her life. The same boy, Oliver Karafa, with whom she had a brief high school romance, reappeared on the horizon. Oliver was now 26. What had he been up to for the past 10 years? After graduating high school, Karafa tried to become a model. His photos could be seen on modeling agency websites at the time, but most of the time since he last saw Lucy, Oliver spent in a prison cell. One evening in 2012, 19-year-old Oliver went out drinking with his friend David and David's girlfriend. They got very drunk, mixing several types of alcoholic drinks, and were not entirely coherent. The girlfriend left the friends around 2 a.m., but the guys continued to drink heavily. Finally stepping out into the fresh air, Oliver decided he was capable of driving. However, as it later turned out, his alcohol level was several times above the legal limit. Oliver got behind the wheel, and his friend David sat in the passenger seat. Both were very drunk. Without fully realizing his actions, Karafa hit the road and sped down the highway. His speed was excessive until an obstacle appeared in his path. Due to his intoxication, the young man lost control. He veered off the road at full speed and crashed into a pole. It was a serious accident. Witnesses said the sound was like a plane crash. The car was practically split in half. Unfortunately for David, his seatbelt was torn from its mounting mechanism. The impact threw the passenger out of the car and he hit a lamppost. His skull was literally crushed, and the boy died on the spot. David lost his life due to his friend's recklessness and irresponsibility. Meanwhile, Oliver somehow miraculously survived the horrific crash alive and almost unscathed. He had only minor injuries, although authorities later stated that no one should have survived that accident. When Oliver finally realized what had happened, he said he was in deep trouble, that he'd go to jail because a person died because of him. And that's exactly what happened. Karafa was arrested and charged with driving under the influence causing death. By that time, his parents had already returned to Slovakia, and they had to post bail for him. In 2014, Oliver was sentenced to 5 years in prison and banned from driving for 15 years. However, prison didn't reform the wayward teenager. He constantly got into trouble, was involved in smuggling, and kept company with shady individuals. Due to his behavior, Oliver was repeatedly denied parole, so he served the full 5 years. The parole board stated that Karafa was a young man with an abnormal sense of entitlement who believed that society's rules didn't apply to him. And so, in 2019, after serving his full sentence, Oliver tried to get his life back on track. He went on social media, hoping to reconnect with people from his past, and stumbled upon the triplets' profile. He immediately recognized Lucy, his high school girlfriend. Now she was a model and looked very modern and attractive. Of course, Karafa wanted to reach out to her. Lucy was over the moon when Oliver messaged her. She learned that he still dreamed of becoming a model, and in that, they were very similar. Her former boyfriend seemed even more charming and handsome than he was in school. Without hesitation, she agreed to go on a date. The young couple's relationship developed rapidly, as by the second date, Lucy moved in with Oliver. Lucy's mother, Winnie, was not thrilled with this decision because she categorically disliked the young man. She believed he was a bad influence on her daughter and was certain that Oliver would lead Lucy down the wrong path. Considering what would happen next, the mother was right. As a means of leverage, Winnie cut off Lucy's financial support. She had been giving the triplets several $1,000s a month for expenses. Now she declared that since her daughter was living with her boyfriend, she could support herself. At first, this was quite difficult for Lucy, even though she and her sisters earned money from social media advertising, which had to be split 3 ways. Besides, the girl was used to living in luxury, never denying herself anything. However, the problem was soon resolved because Oliver started earning substantial sums and was able to meet his girlfriend's demands. The only thing was, he earned them through less than legal means. After getting out of prison, Karafa started one shady business after another. He wanted to become a real entrepreneur, an influential businessman, a multi-millionaire, so he dabbled in all sorts of things, from exporting cars for social media ad shoots to selling weighted blankets. Oliver was ready to do anything to make a ton of money. And he succeeded. Soon, the couple moved into a 2-bedroom townhouse in Toronto. Lucy was Oliver's personal driver because he had lost his driver's license and was banned from driving for 15 years. The girl drove him to all his business meetings and helped transport the cars he sold. Lucy was involved in all of her boyfriend's business ventures. There were suspicions that all these enterprises were illegal. The imported cars that Karafa brought into and out of the country were most likely stolen. He sold them for parts, smuggled them, and made a decent profit from it. But as the saying goes, if you're not caught, you're not a thief. Lucy and Oliver's relationship had been going on for a whole year when the pandemic began in the spring of 2020. The whole world was in lockdown. The couple also stayed home in isolation for a while. But then Oliver got the idea to visit Slovakia to see his parents and then travel around Europe despite the pandemic. And, of course, he wanted to take Lucy with him to introduce her to his family. They bought plane tickets, arrived at the airport, and tried to board their flight. But due to pandemic restrictions, Karafa could return to Slovakia because he had dual citizenship, while Lucy could not because she wasn't a Slovak citizen. At the airport, the couple was told that the only way Lucy could board the flight was if she were Oliver's wife. Any reasonable person would have accepted the rules and canceled the trip. But Lucy and Oliver were not rational people. They decided to get married right there in the airport, online. During the lockdown, Many things were indeed done via Zoom, including marriage registrations. But getting married at the airport just to board a plane, without any prior talk of marriage, was foolish and reckless. Nevertheless, Lucy and Oliver did it. They traveled around Europe for several months and then returned home to Canada at the end of the summer. Meanwhile, Karafa planned to expand his business. Somehow, he met a man named Tyler Pratt and desperately wanted to work with him. Oliver saw great opportunities in Tyler that he wanted to exploit. But their relationship with the new acquaintance was far from smooth. Tyler Pratt was born in British Columbia and grew up in a large family. He had previously been married and had 2 children. Officially, Tyler played hockey and, like Oliver, was an entrepreneur, running a diamond production company and a dietary supplement company. But on an unofficial level, this man was involved in selling illegal substances. He wasn't just a street dealer, he was a major player. Pratt dealt with importing large quantities of white powder from another country and then selling it to lower-level distributors. Accordingly, he made a lot of money from it. Rumors were that he could sell drugs worth $1 million in a single day, so Tyler was very wealthy. In 2020, Pratt divorced his wife, but continued to stay in touch with his children. Despite what he did, people said he was a wonderful father. He never missed holidays or his children's birthdays. He was very attentive and spent all his free time with them. Tyler was around 40 when he met a woman named Jordan Romano in 2020. Jordan grew up in Ontario and was about 25 when she met Pratt. The woman made a living as an exotic dancer. Their romance developed quickly. Soon, Jordan quit her job because her boyfriend took over all her financial needs. The couple lived in luxury, designer clothes, expensive cars, costly trips, and the like. In the summer of 2020, Jordan and Tyler decided to start a life together. They got engaged and planned to marry soon, to create a full-fledged family. Most importantly, Tyler wanted to quit the illegal business, start living an honest life, and become a law-abiding businessman. Jordan said they just wanted to be a normal couple and get rid of the negativity associated with selling illegal substances. However, sooner or later, one has to pay for any sins. And in July 2020, fate brought Pratt together with Oliver Karafa. When Tyler was looking for an honest entrepreneur among his acquaintances to invest his money in, someone suggested he contact Oliver. The men arranged to meet for a business dinner to get to know each other better. Karafa was a very charming person and knew how to persuade. He spent the entire evening telling his new acquaintance about his grand plans, assuring him of the legality of his business, and boasting about his successes. At the end of the dinner, Oliver asked Tyler if he wanted to invest in one of his new ventures. In fact, Pratt was very impressed by the young man who had achieved remarkable heights in a short time. He was taken with the idea of a legitimate business and agreed to invest $170,000 at their first meeting, even though he had no idea what it was about. In reality, Oliver, learning that Tyler had a lot of money, made up a non-existent business on the spot and convinced him to invest. When Karafa returned home to Lucy after this meeting, he asked her to come up with a business to invest Tyler's money in. Oliver was tossing around various ideas, and one horrific thought came to mind. Since Karafa himself was from Eastern Europe, he could bring girls from there and find clients here in Canada. In other words, he wanted to invest Tyler's money in another underground and despicable business. Pratt would hardly have approved of his idea. Oliver shared his thoughts with his wife. Fortunately, Lucy had enough sense to dissuade her husband from such a venture, telling him it was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. In the end, Karafa decided to start a business selling personal protective equipment, which was especially popular during the pandemic. Protective masks, goggles, and gloves, everything used by hospital staff and ordinary citizens during the lockdown. Oliver planned to make a financial profit by buying these in-demand items at a low price and then selling them at a high markup to make a fortune. With his idea, Karafa went to Tyler and outlined all the advantages of the new venture. Tyler was thrilled and thought Oliver had struck gold. Pratt already considered Karafa his new best friend and business partner, but in reality, things were not so rosy. Jordan and Lucy also became friends and started spending a lot of time together. The families began meeting frequently, visiting each other's homes. Tyler adored his new partner so much that he gave him expensive jewelry for his birthday. The couples dined together, had dinners, and even planned a joint vacation in Italy. Karafa told Tyler that the business was going well, and they were selling personal protective equipment by the truckload. Profits were flowing in, but he needed more money to increase shipments. Pratt, inspired by being an honest investor now, didn't hesitate to give Oliver another $470,000. All transactions were done verbally. There were no official contracts between the two partners. The money was handed over informally, often over dinner. Tyler knew the new business was legal, so he wasn't worried. He was 99% confident in his new partner. But no one knew where the money actually went. Even Lucy didn't suspect what Oliver was really doing. She simply believed that all the money was being invested in personal protective equipment that was then shipped to Europe. A few months later, Tyler started asking questions. He asked where his share was and when he would see a return on his investments. Oliver explained to his partner that the money was in Europe and couldn't be easily withdrawn. It would take some time. He showed bank statements from European accounts. One of them had a balance of 12 million euros. Karafa convinced Tyler that 3 million of that was guaranteed for Pratt. This reassured the investor somewhat. Everything would have been fine, except the accounts Oliver showed his partner were fake. There were no 12 million euros in his accounts. Where the $640,000 Tyler had provided actually went remains a mystery. Whether the personal protective equipment business ever existed is also unknown. At least, it wasn't reported in the media. One thing is certain. At some point, Oliver lost all that money. Or perhaps it was nothing more than a simple scam from the start. Regardless of what really happened to the funds, Tyler returned to the issue of profits. He demanded the 3 million euros that Karafa had guaranteed him. But Oliver didn't have that kind of money. He didn't know what to do and, in desperation, turned to Lucy. He explained to his wife that he had lost the funds Pratt had provided for the business and didn't know how to get out of the situation. Lucy suggested buying time and wrote a check in Tyler's name for $1.5 million. This money was supposedly to be withdrawn from Lucy's mother's bank account. The girl assured her husband that Winnie wouldn't even notice the missing amount. Lucy thought the check scam would calm Tyler down and give them the time needed to find a real solution. It later turned out that the check was never cashed. The next step was another scam. Winnie, Lucy's mother, ran an insurance company, and the girl had spent enough time there to understand how it worked. Lucy told Pratt that she could arrange an insurance policy through her mother's firm to transfer money from Europe to Canada without paying taxes. Tyler and Jordan agreed to purchase a $1.5 million insurance policy, unaware that they were being deceived again. In reality, Lucy committed insurance fraud, simply keeping the money she received from her friends. Instead of finding a way out of the mess Oliver had created, Lucy made it even worse. It's unclear what these people were thinking or what they were hoping for. February 2021 arrived. Tyler was fed up with giving money and getting no return on his investments. He had bought the insurance policy from Lucy to try to speed up the process of transferring funds from Europe, but he still hadn't seen a cent. He realized that for some reason Oliver and Lucy were just stalling, so he warned his partner that if he didn't see the money by March 1st, they would have serious problems. Oliver panicked because he knew about Tyler's illegal business and assumed he might still have connections with dangerous people. Karafa turned to Lucy for advice again. The couple thought long and hard about how to get out of the situation. They didn't have enough money to settle with Tyler. That's when Oliver and Lucy decided they needed to end it once and for all. And that's when things took an even more horrific turn. On February 28, 2021, just one day before the deadline, Karafa invited his partner and his fiancée to a business meeting. The reason, supposedly, was a new business idea: to grow marijuana legally. Oliver had even found a large warehouse in an industrial park, the perfect place to implement his brilliant idea. He sketched out a business plan and assured Tyler that they could make much more money. Karafa claimed he had already arranged everything with a realtor, so he invited his partner to join him at the meeting to discuss it together. Pratt was intrigued and, unaware that it was all a big lie, that there was no realtor or business plan, agreed to the meeting. In reality, Karafa lured Tyler to the warehouse for a far more sinister reason. Earlier that day, Oliver had bought a car from his friend for cash. It was a white Audi Q5, and officially, the car had no connection to Karafa. Then Lucy obtained a SIM card registered to one of her friends to further cover their tracks. A few days before the set date, Oliver and Lucy exchanged various messages with each other, discussing Tyler and his fiancée, Jordan. In their correspondence, they also discussed the details of the sinister plan they were to carry out on the last day of winter. The couple even tried to encrypt their messages. So, on February 28, 2021, using the borrowed SIM card, Oliver sent Tyler a message, warning him that he and Lucy were just 10 minutes away from the warehouse. Meanwhile, Karafa and Lee drove to the empty hangar in the white Audi, turned around the corner of the building, and hid the car in a small dead end. Lucy, who was driving, wore a light-colored wig as a disguise in case the car was accidentally caught on surveillance cameras. Soon after, Tyler and his fiancée, Jordan Romano, also arrived at the warehouse in their Range Rover and pulled into the parking lot behind the building, where they were supposedly meeting the realtor. And that's when the alarming events began to unfold. Tyler got out of his car and was confused because his partner had arrived in an unfamiliar vehicle, and his wife, Lucy, was wearing a blonde wig for some reason. Pratt asked Karafa about the realtor they were supposed to meet. While the men talked near their cars, Lucy got into the Range Rover with Jordan and tried to distract her with conversation. Tyler's fiancée was also somewhat puzzled. She thought they would quickly inspect the rental space and then all go to a restaurant to grab a bite. Jordan was dressed for the occasion. She wore a light beige sweater and high-heeled shoes from a famous brand. However, Lucy looked unnatural. Usually, she dressed very stylishly, glamorously, and took every opportunity to emphasize her status with designer clothes. Now, in addition to the strange wig, she was wearing old sweatpants. It was all very suspicious, and Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Recently, Romano had learned that she and Tyler were expecting a baby. She was now 13 weeks pregnant. This wasn't a secret from their friends, so what happened next took on an even more monstrous tone. At some point, stopping mid-sentence, Lucy opened the Range Rover's door and jumped out onto the street. At that moment, Jordan looked up at the men and saw Oliver pointing a gun directly at a bewildered Tyler's face. While Lucy distracted Jordan with her chatter, her husband had pulled out a weapon and was now holding Pratt at gunpoint. Before the pregnant woman could do anything, Oliver aimed the gun at her and pulled the trigger several times. The first 2 bullets missed, hitting the car. Jordan immediately shifted into gear and tried to drive away from the scene. Then Oliver fired a 3rd time. Unfortunately, this shot hit its target. The bullet struck the left side of her chest. It all happened in a matter of seconds. Tyler, standing a few meters away from Oliver, didn't even have time to react to what had just happened. When the man realized that his so-called friend and partner had just shot his pregnant fiancée, he lunged at him. But Oliver managed to turn around and, without aiming, started pulling the trigger. He shot at Tyler 5 or 6 times. Several bullets hit his arms, and one grazed his head. But the final shot, aimed directly at his chest, stopped him, and the man fell to the ground dead. Pregnant Jordan and Tyler saw Oliver and Lucy as friends. They trusted them implicitly. But it was all a lie. After this senseless attack, Karafa and Lee pulled Romano's body out of the Range Rover and left it on the roadside. They got into the car themselves and fled the scene. Their plan was to sell the SUV to make some money. So they took the vehicle to their friend's garage to have it dismantled for parts and sold, thus covering their tracks. After that, the perpetrators returned to the industrial park, walked past the motionless bodies of Jordan and Tyler, and got into the Audi. They took that car to the garage as well and had it dismantled for parts to avoid being traced. Oliver and Lucy returned home by taxi. The couple was in high spirits. The adrenaline was pumping. They had just committed the perfect crime, and there was no way they could ever be caught. The only thing they didn't know was that one of the victims was still alive. At 7:30 p.m., a truck was passing by the warehouse in the industrial park. The driver noticed something unusual on the ground. He stopped the truck and approached to see what had caught his attention. In the grass on the roadside, a woman lay motionless. She was covered in blood. Incredibly, after being shot in the heart, Jordan was still alive. She initially lost consciousness from the pain, but upon coming to, she continued to cling to life. With her last strength, the woman whispered to the driver that she had been shot and asked him to call an ambulance. Emergency services arrived at the scene immediately. Jordan Romano was taken to the hospital and sent for surgery. Naturally, after the report of a shooting, law enforcement officers were also dispatched to the scene. The police found Tyler's body nearby behind the warehouse. Unfortunately, after the shot to the chest, he died instantly. While the authorities were unsuccessfully trying to identify the perpetrators, as they had no idea who could have carried out the shooting. Oliver and Lucy sat at home in front of the TV, following the news. The husband and wife were proud of each other for pulling it off so easily. In one fell swoop, they got rid of all their debts and made some money from selling the two cars. But their joy vanished when the reporter covering the incident announced that one of the victims had survived and was currently in a coma. At that moment, Oliver and Lucy's triumph turned to panic. The news mentioned that the victim's condition had stabilized, and doctors hoped the patient would soon regain consciousness and be able to provide some comments about what happened. This meant their perfect plan had failed. Oliver and Lucy decided to flee Canada immediately. They flew to Eastern Europe just a day after the incident. After spending a few days in a hotel in Prague, the couple went to Slovakia to Oliver's parents. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. The authorities did everything possible to track down those responsible for the crime. They started by checking cell tower data. They managed to trace the number from the SIM card Lucy had borrowed from her friend. The subscriber with that number was at the crime scene during the shooting. Identifying the real owner was easy. The unsuspecting girl had lent her spare SIM card, unaware of any crime. She honestly told the officers that she had given her extra SIM card to Lucy Lee. That's how the police got the names of the first suspects, Lucy Lee and her husband, Oliver Karafa. The next step was checking surveillance cameras, which captured the couple hurriedly leaving their apartment and heading to the airport, adding to the suspicions. Then evidence started piling up, one after another. The light-colored wig, parts of Lucy's clothing with bloodstains, documents related to the insurance scheme, and keys to the white Audi seen at the crime scene on cameras. The evidence against the couple was mounting, and 3 days after being in a coma, Jordan Romano woke up. The girl was confused and didn't immediately understand what had happened to her. Police officers had to deliver the heartbreaking news to Jordan. She had not only lost her fiancé, but also her unborn child. Recovering from the initial shock, Romano did everything she could to recall the events of that tragic day. An international arrest warrant was issued for 28-year-old Oliver and 25-year-old Lucy, who had fled the country. According to law enforcement, the couple spent some time in Slovakia with Karafa's parents, then visited the Czech Republic before disappearing in Budapest, Hungary. Lucy's mother, a well-known entrepreneur in Canada, reached out to the media and made a statement, saying she was shocked, alarmed, and puzzled by her daughter's involvement in this unfortunate incident. The woman publicly urged Lucy to cooperate with the police, but Oliver Karafa's parents reacted very differently when they learned that their son and daughter-in-law were suspected of committing a crime. The boy's father paid €250,000 to some people to hide Oliver and Lucy, and provide them with new identification documents. That's how the criminal couple ended up in Hungary, where they hid for 2 months until the police caught up with them. Karafa and Lee were arrested and placed in a holding cell. Now they faced a lengthy extradition process to Canada. While Oliver protested against returning, insisting he be sent to his native Slovakia, Lucy spent a few days in a Hungarian prison and declared that it wasn't a 5-star hotel, so she needed to return to Canada immediately. The girl was unhappy with the hard bed, the clothes provided, the tasteless food, and the dreary environment. And when the authorities agreed to send her to Canada, Lucy threw a tantrum over the economy class seat. She demanded to be allowed to fly first class because her mother could afford a comfortable trip for her daughter. This was the height of audacity and cynicism. During questioning at the police station, where Lucy was taken straight from the plane, she refused to say anything, explaining that her mother and lawyer had forbidden her from speaking. Apparently, Lee hoped her mother's money would help her avoid conviction. The girl confidently stated that she was not guilty of anything. In their relationship, Oliver handled the finances. She didn't know how he dealt with his business problems and never cared to find out. Lucy and Oliver were set a bail of $2.7 million. The mother immediately paid the full amount, and the girl was released pending trial. Subsequently, Lucy violated the conditions of her bail, so she was taken back into custody and sent to jail. Meanwhile, Oliver, who was eventually extradited back to Canada, was denied bail altogether. He spent 2 years in prison awaiting trial. The court hearing began in April 2024. The trial lasted just over a month. Sitting in the dock, Lucy spun a wild, elaborate story about how she was forced to suffer because of her husband. She accused him of every sin imaginable, just to get herself off the hook. Lucy also tried to provide herself with an alibi, claiming she spent the entire day with her family, though no family member could confirm this. Her husband and accomplice, Oliver Karafa, refused to testify in court. The jury found Oliver and Lucy guilty on all charges. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years.